It's the E-commerce Master Plan podcast. Here to help you solve your marketing problems and grow your e-commerce business. Cutting through the hype to bring you inspiration and advice from the e-commerce sector and beyond. Here's your host, Chloe Thomas.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the E-commerce Masterplan podcast. I'm Chloe Thomas, the creator and host of this award-winning show, and it's my aim in every episode to help you find ways to improve your e-commerce business. And today is no exception to that. Today I'm talking with a retail industry specialist who's globally recognized as really knowing and understanding how trends and consumer behavior are going to affect the future of retail. And we're talking about how all these consumer behavior changes we've seen this year, what they mean, what's happened, what's likely to stick, what's likely to change, and also about what's likely to happen in the near future going into 2021, and how, knowing all of this, you can keep your retail business going and how you can really thrive and survive. And we're doing this because of a report that my guest has been involved with called How We'll Shop Winners and Losers, which in my opinion, is a must-read for anyone in retail, D2C, or e-commerce who's planning their 2021 strategies and beyond, who wants to get a better idea of how consumers and retail, by retail I mean on and offline, are being impacted by the pandemic, the lockdowns, the furloughs, all the strange situations we're going through at the moment. And what I will also say is that I would suggest you listen rather to this podcast, because you can't read a podcast. Listen to this podcast and then also go and get your hands on that report, and then you'll get the stats, the data, and lots of great insight for how to shape your business going into next year. You can find the report and the notes for this show on our show notes page. So head to ecommercemasterplan.com/podcast and click on the link to this show. And there you'll find the link through to the report and everything else we talk about today. Okay, so quick little health warning though. Both me and my guest do have British accents, but we are very much aware that everything we're talking about is stuff which is going on globally, not just in the UK. And the report we're mentioning is based on US data. So wherever you are in the world, stay tuned, because these lessons are ones that are happening everywhere. Right, before we get into that though, please do check out the sponsors. This podcast is brought to you by Klavio, the ultimate e-commerce marketing platform for email and SMS messaging. Whether you're launching your e-commerce business or taking your brand to the next level, Klavio gives you the tools to get growing faster. That's why it's trusted by over 38,000 e-commerce brands. Build your contact lists and emails that pop and create marketing moments that build valuable customer relationships over any distance. Get started for free today. Visit klavio.com/masterplan to create your free account. That's klavio.com/masterplan. Smart Freight can help you save time and money. Smart shipping parcels and pallets through Smart Freight's carrier management platform allows you to consolidate your outbound logistics onto one platform. With over 650 carriers worldwide, Smart Freight has you covered by ensuring you are always going via the cheapest, fastest, or greenest eco-friendly option. Visit smartfreight.com to book a demo today. And now to introduce today's guest expert. Andrew Busby is the CEO of Retail Reflections. Once upon a time, he was a retailer himself, but for most of the last decade, he's been helping retailers to understand where the opportunities and threats that they need to adapt for lie. Now, that includes being a contributor to Forbes, being on the advisory boards of multiple events and magazines, and holding the position of IBM Social Commerce Futurist for over 4 years. As well as speaking at many events and writing for many top publications, Andrew's been named a top 20 global retail influencer, which puts my top 50 UK e-commerce influencer status quite firmly in the shade. So we are very honoured to have Andrew giving up his time to be on the show today. And quite frankly, who better could we be speaking to about what the future holds for retail? Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Chloe. That's very kind of you. Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you here and talking about something which I think, the crystal ball is very cloudy at the moment for most of us. So for someone like you who's got a lot more clarity on their crystal ball than we have when it comes to retail, I think this is going to be a fascinating episode for everyone. But before we get into that, how did you become addicted to this wonderful world of retail? How did you get involved with it all?
Yeah, before I get into that, I think my crystal ball is probably just as opaque as everyone else's at the moment, but maybe I can see through it a little bit and offer some suggestions and so forth. I got into retail just over 20 years ago. I had spent the best part of 20 years in various IT positions with Barclays, and then I completely flipped and I went sectors, that is, and I went into retail and I joined Kingfisher, and specifically I joined Superdrug. And for those listeners who are old enough to remember, in those days, so this was going back to 1999, Kingfisher comprised the likes of Superdrug, Woolies, Comet, Entertainment UK, and obviously B&Q. So a very different beast to what we know today. So I joined and had a great time there, and that really got me into retail. And I think for a lot of people, retail, and certainly working in retail, is a little bit Marmite, and you do either love it or you just don't take to it. I loved it, and I still do to this day. So that got me into it, and Superdrug was a great, and still is a great business, I think, to learn. It was just a brilliant size because, of course, in those days it was all bricks and clicks. Now there's obviously a strong e-commerce arm to it, and I was actually involved in the early days of setting that up. But it meant that even though I was running the IT services and operations there, it got me in contact with all the different departments. And I still remember, again, for us grey-haired oldies, I can remember the year 2000, and the world was going to come to an end, probably a bit like a combination of Brexit and COVID. We will get through it, by the way, people, although it seems pretty difficult at the moment. But I remember I was chairing an exec board of representatives from all across the business, and it was just fascinating. It was such a great learning for me to learn about how a retail business operates, and I still fall back onto that. So that was the experience that got me in, and I've stayed within retail ever since.
And these days, you kind of scan what's going on to help us work out what we're supposed to do, as I said in the intro. So, of all the things and all the consumer trends that have changed this year, which ones do you think are going to stick? Are we going to continue living like this, or are things going to go back to normal, in inverted commas?
Yeah, the new normal. Gosh, how I loathe that phrase. I probably loathe it as much as things like frictionless and omni-channel. But that's me just getting old and grumpy and whatever. So what is going to, and I think actually that's a really interesting question, because one of the things that I tried to say in some of my comments in the Bright Pearl report was that one of the tricks, I think, for retailers now is to try to understand what of our new behavior is embedded, and what is more ephemeral and will dissipate as we come out of the other side of this, whenever we do. And I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question. I mean, psychologists will tell us that new behavior, it takes 66 days for new behavior to become embedded, and obviously we've had a lot more than 66 days of this to enjoy. So, I think that one of the things specifically is that there's been clearly a lot of people who have discovered the joys of online e-commerce shopping. And by that, I mean the ease and convenience primarily. And so how much of that new spend will remain? Now, the last time I looked, and looking at the ONS figures, and of course this does vary depending on what you look at, but I think it was as a percentage, including grocery, I think a percentage of total sales now is something like round about 30%. Now, before this, so I'm going back to obviously to mid-March, it was slowly increasing, but was still around about the 20% mark. So that's quite a huge increase when you look at the growth over the years. And then, of course, the question is, where is that going to plateau out? Is it going to be at the current level? No. It's certainly going to be higher. I've talked to people in the industry who believe that it could be as much as 50. So half of all our spending will be online. Now, if that comes to pass, Although I would say, however, and I'm sure there's a lot of the people who are listening to this and say, "Whoa, hold on a second. What about sales attribution? How on earth can you really know?" Because now, of course, the customer journey, if it was complex before, it's mega hyper, call it what you like, complex now. So in other words, what I mean by that, which I'd imagine that a lot of people listening to this have already gathered, but let's just say that you want a new television. So that's a big ticket item. It could be £500 plus. You go online, you do your research, you go into store, you have a look, you're not sure, it's a lot of money to spend. You go back, you might think, oh, I'm going to use this new buy now, pay later, so I'll research that. You go back in the store, you have a look, they try to sell you all the add-ons because we know that's where the margin is. You go back, you go online, and so in other words, the point is that the journey is very complex. So how do you really understand the impact of online and its relationship with stores? So we know that there are an awful lot of retailers who believe that they have too much space, and to an extent that's probably true. So they're closing stores without, I think, really understanding the relationship between their stores and their online e-commerce presence. So I think this is something that is still playing out, and I think that related to it, the majority of retailers are still measuring the wrong things. So they're measuring sales per square foot as a key driver of the business. Well, I would suggest that it should be more, how is my customer feeling? What is my customer sentiment? And perhaps we'll return to that later, because that gives them a better insight, and particularly now when we're all behaving slightly differently, we're all anxious to varying degrees, and I think that applies to every single one of us, me included. And probably we, particularly us men, we try to we're not like that. We're tough. We can. Well, no, this is something none of us has ever experienced before, and it's so uncertain, and it's so uncertain for the foreseeable future. We can't. There's no end in sight to this, and I think that's probably key to this. That if somebody said, "Look, this is all going to be over by January the 31st next year," for example, and you're all going to be able to return to what it was like before. Well, okay, that would be a slightly different scenario.
We're going to behave quite differently. If we knew 100%, if you do this, you're not going to catch it. Or if you do that, you will catch it. And if we had, it's all going to end on the 31st of January. So you've only got to put up with this for another 2-3 months. We behave so differently than if we think we're going to have to do this for several years. I find it quite fascinating how even when, looking here in the UK, even when the original lockdown officially kind of ended and we went into the world of social distancing, people continued to buy heavily online. And it does, like you're saying about those 66 days, it very much seems like there's a huge number of people who are going to continue spending that money online and then using the physical retail world for like we've been talking about for several years, but kind of this acceleration of the trend, the experiential side of things. So I guess is why you're saying don't shut the stores, use your space more wisely.
And that was like, a number of the trends. I mean, I was one of those, I'm one of those who every year come end of December, early January, use that dead period in between Christmas and New Year to write a number of blogs with my predictions and so forth for the year to come. And this time it was the decade to come. And so there were lots of trends, and that was one of them, using your space in a different way, in a better way, that was there. Clearly, there were trends which none of us could have envisaged, such as working from home. I think we predicted an increase in online, but not to the extent that we've seen, for reasons that we know. So, we didn't realize back then that the world was about to change around us fundamentally. But retail is, almost by definition, it's a pretty hardy beast. Now, it's got to go through a period of far more change than it ever has. And going back to the Bright Pearl report, we know that sadly there'll be losers. And the sad part about that, by the way, for me, is always the jobs that are lost. Usually, it's not so sad about the particular business itself, because if we go back and look at the failed retail businesses, which I know we're not here to do today, but just as a point, generally there's a reason for it.
If you're giving the customer what they want, then the business will survive. And often my retail career started off at Pastimes, the historical gift retailer on the high street, which went under for the second or third time when I was there, and then continued through a series of kind of a slow, painful death over the best part of a decade before I think it became a brand in WH Smith's in the end. And what has always struck me about that business is that if you really analyze why it ended, it was because it started chasing the cash rather than giving the customer what they wanted. It went from this kind of beautiful historical take on gift giving and homewares into this chase the money, chase the money, chase the money. And it's kind of like a death by a million cuts, all these tiny decisions. So yeah, I think it's the jobs that we have to be worried for. But actually, if a retailer goes, it's because the customers, quite frankly, don't want you anymore, which creates opportunities for other people.
That's a really interesting point, chasing the cash, because I've, again, one of the things that I've held for some time now is that's part of the problem. And for some of the retailers, that's the number one, the sales first approach. And I think that what they need to do is to pivot. It's very, very, very difficult to do. I do get that. But that sales come as a result of a great experience. Now, obviously not in all sectors within retail, perhaps, but I do believe that generally that holds true. And I think that's one of the things that will be a byproduct of this whole pandemic that we find ourselves in.
So if you were, let's look to 2021, because it's November when this episode goes out. So the chances that anyone can make a big difference before the end of the year are quite slight. So looking to 2021, if you were in charge of let's go for a bricks and clicks retailer, some with physical and the online presence, good or bad online presence, what would be on your core to-do list that you wanted to get happening in the beginning part of 2021 to future-proof?
Well, first of all, for years, usually it was the technology vendors were pushing this, but they were always saying, you have to transform your business, you have to digitize your business. Well, yeah, that's now come to pass. And when we've seen so many who don't quite, they say, yes, so we're going to appoint a digital officer and we're going to have digital czars throughout the business and so on and so forth. I've got one in mind I won't name there, and that's simply not the way to do it. You've got to have it running as a DNA throughout your business. And kind of then hand in hand with that is that you have to be, particularly, when you do have an e-commerce presence, because who knows what's going to happen? Are we going to have another national lockdown and so-called non-essential retailers will have to close again? I guess anything is, it's all up for grabs. So you need to go where your customers are. So there were, I've spoken to a number of people who are involved quite closely with independent retailers, and I've seen some stats which are quite alarming, that in the lockdown, which included non-essential retail, virtually all the independent retailers, and there'll be some I know who'll be, probably shouting at the moment, saying, "No, we were." But the data suggests that most independent retailers just stopped engaging with their customers, so their social media was zero.
That's
or very close
crazy.
to it. Exactly, yeah, it is because they're and okay, some of these could have been simply bricks and clicks, but they had a static, non-transactional website, or they could have had a transactional. But either way, they pretty much stopped. So you need to go where your your customer is, and you need to engage with them. That's, if you're to really look and boil everything down, there are plenty of other things, obviously, like you need to make sure that you've got complete visibility of your inventory. So your inventory management needs to, because that drives the supply chain, because you should expect more online, et cetera, and you should be looking at not delivery next day or the next 48 hours, but same day or same hour. Really start using this as an opportunity for accelerated innovation. And again, that's a word that's been used for years, and you have to innovate this and that and so on and so forth. Well, now is really the time to do that. Don't stop talking about it. And I think the last thing that I would say on that at the moment would be, again, and this is from my experience of working within retail and working with retailers, and it's a little bit of a hobby horse of mine, and that is, stop all this tendering process. Think about your business and what you're bringing through in a different way. I've seen tenders that are 12 months. I've been involved in tenders that went on for nearly 2 years. And frankly, but even back then, the world changed within 6 months. The world is changing within, 6 days almost at the moment. So in other words, the message is you've got to be really agile and fleet of foot. And again, we know that's people talk about it an awful lot, but it really does apply now. You can't go out for anything that you're procuring and say, well, we've got to go to 3 or 4 or even 6 and tender for it, and we've got to go through our due process to show due diligence for our reasons of internal governance and so on and so forth. Because by the time you've done all that, you could well have gone out of business.
Yeah. And as you said, the tech will have moved on and your needs will have moved on. And
absolutely.
I like all those points you made, but I think for me, the bit which maybe I'm biased because I spend most of my time in the e-commerce world rather than the bricks world, but it does strike me that those companies who had the right tech in place that enabled them to know where all their stock is, that enabled them to kind of farm out their customer services to the store staff who had no one to serve, but they could deal with the online live chats, they could deal with the online calls because they know the product, and that could then kind of almost redeploy their manpower from offline to online because they had the right tech in place and they could dispatch from store and do click and collect and all these great things, are the ones who will have done better through this. One, because they could take sales, but also because they could look after the customer better and the customer will remember that and will continue buying from them. And I think if I was in a retailer who didn't have that right now, I would be out there shopping fast for the tech to put it in place.
Yeah.
Because once it's there, you have the visibility, you have the flexibility, and you can shift that manpower and those costs around. So I would love to be owning a tech company right now who does an integrated POS and web system, because I suspect they're getting lots of knocks on the door. But Andrew, is there anything which has really surprised you about how consumer behaviours shifted and what that's meant for retail this year, which, even if you'd have been sat there between Christmas and New Year last year going, what's my predictions for the decade? What if a pandemic happens? I reckon this might happen. Is there something which has completely surprised you?
I think probably the trend towards certain things. So before this, you and I were chatting, and I know this isn't something you go to a shop, you go online to purchase, but it's quite a good example. You said that down in your neck of the woods in Cornwall, the price of houses has gone through the, pardon the pun, gone through the roof. But but that, for me, is an indication of what is happening across the country. So during the lockdown in the summer, everybody was going out and buying barbecues and trampolines and goodness knows what else. And we know that, I think from John Lewis, they were saying that bread makers. And so I thought, right, I'm going to get myself a far better coffee machine because I'm at home all the time working. So I'll do that. And so I think that it's this trend. And again, maybe not so much now, but a very good business to be in during the summer was either hire or selling motorhomes, because people weren't going away on holidays, so they were going, getting a motorhome and driving somewhere. But yeah, I think it's that different, and it's almost like the law of unintended consequences. One thing leads to another, and because as human beings, we're very adaptable. We try to find ways we're ingenious, and we try to find ways to invent things and get around things, and so on and so forth. So I think that we're going to see, as we approach Christmas, we're going to see more of that. And just at one point on, if I may, on Christmas, I think it's going to be a fascinating one. And for me, it's going to be binary. And by that, I mean, it's either going to be incredibly good for some people, or it's going to be incredibly just awful. We know that, sadly, more and more people will be made redundant. So disposable income is going to be, people are going to really have to pull in their family budgets and so forth. On the other hand, there are going to be people who are in a different position, and they're going to say, well, actually, 2020 has been, pretty poor as a year. I don't think I want to remember 2020. So I'm going to treat myself and my family, and I'm going to splash out, and so it's going to be really interesting. I think that, and maybe towards Christmas, we're going to see the luxury sector have a bit of a revival. Perhaps people can say, well, no, actually, we're going to splash out on some jewelry, or a nice watch, or whatever, or a handbag, whatever it is that, we like, because, well, we deserve it. We've made a lot of sacrifices. We can't see any end to all of this. We need to cheer ourselves up. We can't go away on holiday. I think, behavior, there are going to be some fortunate people who are going to really splash out, but for a lot, probably the majority, this is going to be a Christmas to really tighten our belts.
It's a fascinating one, that whole consumer spending ability angle, because we've got rising unemployment, we've got end of furlough schemes and support schemes happening around the world. And so we've got people who've got less money and who are dealing with this rebalancing and redistribution of the labor market. But at the same time, we've also got people who have been completely financially unaffected in terms of their income, and who haven't spent as much because they couldn't go on holiday, they couldn't do this, they couldn't do that. They're no longer commuting and spending all the money on their commute. They're no longer having to eat they're no longer eating at cafes 5 days a week, which makes a huge difference to their disposable income. So it's, people say the recession's coming and it's all going to be bad, but it's like, yes, but there's a whole sector of the society who've actually got more disposable income compared to those who haven't. And yes, that certainly is going to create this bizarre situation this Christmas. How do you think, really, this is a really tough question now, how do you think that whole recession piece is going to play out in 2021? Do you think it's going to have, kind of make much difference to the issues we're seeing now? Are we going to see a down in overall retail spend?
Yes, I think we are. But I also think that we're going to see more inventiveness and more innovation from retailers. So, shout out to Morrison's, who introduced their Christmas box for a family of 4 for £50, which includes all you need for your Christmas lunch. Great idea. I think we'll see more of that, but just in different scenarios. So I think that retailers are going to, I think, we're going to get down to, I guess, grocery and fashion. We all need to eat, and we all need to put clothes on our backs. We need to have our Zoom gear or what have you. And so retailers will know that people have got less disposable. It's only going to get tougher. We know that the measures such as furlough and government grants and loans and so forth, and I'm sure there'll be different flavors of that, but it all seems at the moment to be diluting down a little bit. And then, of course, we've got the frankly ridiculous notion that we should all retrain. I don't know about you. As an aside, I had a look the other day at the government web skills assessment website, and if anybody's listening in and hasn't looked at it yet, don't waste your time. I think it's suggested that I should retrain as a horse trainer.
Wow, that's quite niche.
That's quite niche. There were a few others there as well, but it didn't bother to establish that actually me and horses don't go together. It's just me.
Yeah. Likewise, at a distance only. For anyone who's listening from overseas, this is a fascinating site that the UK government has put together to help those of us who no longer have a job work out what to retrain in. And it's kept social media busy for about the last 10 days since it went live, with some phenomenally ridiculous marketing tactics and ridiculous answers. So if you fancy a giggle, anyone from overseas, go and have a go as well, because it's quite ludicrous.
There was a story of a 57-year-old lady who was it was recommended that she retrain as a professional boxer. So there you go. But getting back to your question, I think that there is going to be less because people simply aren't going to be earning as much. So it's not rocket science. This, if people aren't earning as much, they're not going to be spending as much. Working from home, I think, is quite interesting. It's kind of we're seeing what I call the Pret effect. That we're working from home far more. So maybe I'll spend, and I do it myself from time to time, not every day, obviously, but maybe once a week, I will go out to the local high street and I'll find somewhere and I'll eat. I'll have my lunch break, eating out, just simply to have a change of scenery, get some fresh air, and get out of the home office. So my spend there is going to be on my local high street. So my spend has changed. And I think that we're going to see more of that, which actually should, I hope, have a positive impact on local high streets.
E-commerce Master Plan is supported by some of the greatest companies in the e-commerce sector. Here's a reminder of who they are.
This podcast is brought to you by Klavio, the ultimate e-commerce marketing platform for email and SMS messaging. Whether you're launching your e-commerce business or taking your brand to the next level, Klavio gives you the tools to get growing faster. That's why it's trusted by over 38,000 e-commerce brands. Build your contact lists and emails that pop and create marketing moments that build valuable customer relationships over any distance. Get started for free today. Visit klavio.com/masterplan to create your free account. That's klavio.com/masterplan. Customer experience when shopping online is crucial, and it doesn't stop at the checkout. Smart Freight plugged into your e-commerce platform allows your customers to take the driving seat when it comes to selecting a shipping service. And branded tracking communications keep your customers informed of their order's journey all the way through to receiving their parcel. Visit smartfreight.com to book a demo today.
It's time for the top tips round.
Okay, Andrew, I love this section because it gives me and our listeners some really quick ideas for taking our businesses to the next level. So you ready for the top tips?
Go for it.
Okay, the book top tip. If everyone listening to this podcast agreed to take Friday off and read a book to make their business better, which book would you recommend?
Well, I thought of that. I mean, I know, I'm fortunate to know a lot of people in retail, and most of them have written books, and I could have plugged one of those. And there's some great ones. There's some great ones out there. But the one in my mind that I feel that I keep coming back to is "Start with Why" by Simon Sinek. I think it's a fantastic book. It's a great read. And one of the key things in there, it does talk about, it builds itself as how great leaders inspire everyone to take action. That's the kind of leader on the front page of it. But one of the things in there that he talks about is understand your brand and what it means and what's your story. And he uses Apple as an example of that. Apple are a computer and phone company, but people don't think of them like that. And this is the point that Sinek makes in his book when he talks about understanding your why. Why, and this really does apply to retailers and to brands. Why are you in business? What is your story? And if you and your fellow board members, and actually everybody in your organization, are not able to articulate that in a clear and consistent manner, you need to revisit it. And that's why he uses Apple as a very good example of that. So I would say, yeah, if you take a Friday off, you want to read a book, and you can do it in a Friday, it's an easy read. Yeah, I would go with that. I would start with Why.
Excellent. A great book recommendation. Okay, the traffic top tip. Which marketing method do you either prize above all others or think doesn't get the press it deserves?
Well, I've got, in answer to that, I've got something that I call the 5 E's, if I may, because for me that kind of covers it. So 5 E's. The first one, engage. In other words, engage your audience and keep on engaging with them. Now, it sounds very easy, but a lot of people, as I was saying earlier on this podcast, if they're having to close their physical door, that they're not doing it. You need to always, particularly now, you need to be engaging with your audience. The second is to excite them, inspire them. And my goodness, we need that now, don't we? And that applies both to online and bricks and clicks. Really excite with new innovation, different product, different ways of doing it, so on and so forth. This thinking outside of the box mentality is really needed. Encourage them to transact. Encourage them to come to your online or offline store. So use social media. Communicate with people, encourage them all the time, because again, it's probably too easy for us not to just at the moment, because we're all pretty fatigued and tired and so forth. And kind of in hand with that, enthuse about your product and your offering, because if you don't, then nobody else is going to. This is your, and again, there is one of the reasons why I say that is getting more and more difficult to do. I was listening to a London radio station just before coming onto this podcast, and they interviewed somebody who's a restaurateur in central London, which is going to go at the time of recording this, going into tier 2 lockdown, so you can't mix with other households, and he really sounded despondent, and I understand that fully. So I think now it's a time more than ever to enthuse about what you've got to offer, and we know that's changing. And finally, again, kind of maybe another way of doing that, to be energetic. Really put some enthusiasm and energy into, and by that I really mean see everything as an opportunity. Don't look at this. It's that old thing, isn't it? Don't, your cup's half full or it's half empty. Don't see this as a threat. See it as an opportunity. And we know we've seen examples of hospitality, in particular, that have pivoted during this when they haven't been able to sell as they normally would. Well, that mode of thinking needs to run right through the industry.
I love that. Engage, excite, encourage, enthuse, and be energetic. Very cool. Okay, the tool top tip, maybe a collaboration tool, a social media plugin, a phone app, or just a way of working. Is there a cool little tool you use that makes you and your team more efficient day to day?
There's kind of two things I'd say to that. One, again, it's the one I use, and I'm using it every day, and that's Zoom. Other ways of video conferencing are available, as we know. But, use that wisely. I mean, I don't know about you, Chloe, but I've been on more than I care to mention Zoom calls that are 2 hours or more. And by the end of it, I'm like drained, and you think, so I think hand in hand with that, I would say keep your walking shoes nearby and just get out, get some fresh air. I'm fortunate. I live right on the edge of some lovely countryside in Sussex, and so I can get out. And I'm finding that I do that more and more, if only for 10 or 20 minutes. But just to have a bit like that, going into town to sit down and have lunch, just get a change of scenery.
There's definitely a Zoom strategy. You can't just think any meeting you would do in the real world you can do via Zoom. They have to be approached differently. And if it's going to last 2 hours, it's got to be 2. Can't be 1. Can't all be in one meeting. That's enough to kill anybody.
I know. It is quite interesting, isn't it? The kind of some of the, what we're going to look back on the sounds and the phrases of 2020. It's going to be, Andrew, you're on mute, or
Yeah.
we can't hear you. We can see you, but we can't hear you. And we all wave, don't we?
Yeah.
We wave when we're on a Zoom or a Teams or whatever it happens to be. We wouldn't do that when we walk into a meeting room normally. We wouldn't wave to people before we sat down. I mean, it's quite. But I suppose it's our it's kind of our subconscious way of connecting with people, because we can't shake their hand. Or if it's somebody that we know very well, we can't kiss them, or what, whatever interaction, physical interaction it would be. I guess we wave because it's kind of like it's a nice thing to do. But those would be Zoom, walking shoes, and maybe a little bit of alcohol.
Cool. Okay, the growth top tip. If you met someone today who's focused on growing their e-commerce business or their retail business from 100 orders per month to 1,000, what would be your number one tip for them?
I've kind of touched on this, I think, when I was talking about the book, Know Your Brand, Know Your Story. So I'm not going to say go out and buy this particular tool, or this e-commerce platform is better than the other. No, it's nothing to do with that at all. It's really, what is your brand? What does it stand for? What are your values? And then very closely aligned to that, what's your story? Why are you in business? Because if you don't know, your customers for sure aren't going to know. And if they don't know, or they are confused, which, let's face it, they pretty much are at the moment anyway, because this applies perhaps more to bricks and clicks, but with online, certainly people are confused and they're not sure what's going to happen. They can't plan. So you need to help them try to do that. So I'd say that, know your brand, know your story.
Excellent advice. Well, Andrew, before we say goodbye, could you let the listeners know where they can find you and your business on the web and social media? And I believe you started a new business this year that's quite relevant to some of our listeners too.
Yes. So the business that I set up primarily was Retail Reflections, as you said in the introduction, and you can find that at all the w's.retail-reflections.co.uk. So we talk, and we did before all this speak, at conferences around the world on all sorts of aspects of retail. And you can also find that you can find me at Andrew Busby on Twitter, and Retail Reflections at Retail Reflect on Twitter. We're also on LinkedIn. I launched the new company. We had a soft launch actually last month, so it's very new. A company called Safeprem Solutions. And what we are, in a nutshell, is the world's first independent directory portal of COVID secure solutions. So we've curated all the best of breed from around the world, and we're building that directory. We've got a number of partners at the moment, and these are not people who clean premises or provide PPE or anything like that, because we feel that that's fine and it has its place, but that's still, and this is very much the direction we're taking with these lockdowns. It's very much reactionary steps, and it's curtailing people's movement. It's restricting. It's reactionary and restricting. What we're trying to do with this for retailers is to allow them to provide really premises which are as safe as they possibly can be. So with some proactive preventative measures. So just one example of that would be, we have a partnership with a company in Holland called Airfixer, and they developed a solution where it is constantly cleaning the air. It's cleansing the air within an environment. So if you imagine within a shop or a restaurant or a pub, this is constantly cleaning the air of all the viruses and bacteria which are in the air, and it's providing air which is 3 times cleaner than we would normally have before all of this started. So it's something that we're really excited about. It's taking up the majority of my time. We are focusing on retail because myself and my fellow co-founder are both from a retail background. And we really are passionate about retail, so that's the logical place where it would start. But it applies to all sectors.
Nice. And where can people find that if they want more information?
The website is www.safeprem.com. Or if they want to contact me there, it's info@safeprem.com.
And that's Prem short for premises, isn't it? PREM.
PREM, yes. Safeprem, all one word. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, good luck with that new venture, Andrew. I think it's a very interesting angle, and I suspect you've jumped on it at just the right moment. So thank you so much for all you've shared today, all your tips and ideas and that great insight. And I think our crystal balls are a little less murky. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So a fascinating kind of look at how difficult, I guess, it is to predict what's going to happen over the next, 12, 24 months. There's so many different angles that we talked about there, how people are buying different things. Some people are running out of, don't have money to spend anymore. Others have more money than they used to have to spend. And the impacts of the work from home and people starting to buy online, which people seem to be continuing to do. And of course, things are constantly changing in each country, in each state, in each region of the world. So I think there's going to be certainly more turbulence to come. I think the points that Andrew is making around the need to have the right digital structure in place, so as you can make those changes and you can adapt. It will be the innovative businesses that continue, those who adapt, those who listen to their customers, just as he was saying, know your brand, know your story, and connect with your customers. If you want more data, we didn't get into much of the data there, but if you want the data on how all of this has affected consumers, what they're thinking, how retailers are responding, then you need to get your hands on the report we mentioned, which is called How We'll Shop, Winners and Losers, which goes into who's going to survive and who's not from a business perspective. And that's been produced by Bright Pearl. And if you head to the show notes for this episode, then you'll find the link through to that. And you can also find it on their website. So you will find the notes from today's show, including the link to that report, How We'll Shop, Winners and Losers, and the top tips and everything else we've mentioned at ecommercemasterplan.com/podcast. And we've also added there a link to Andrew's book. So if you're wanting to get a little bit more of Andrew's thoughts on the world of retail, it's a brilliant book. So go and you'll find out details of that on the show notes page too. So that's ecommercemasterplan.com/podcast. There you can also add yourself to our email list so you don't miss out on any of the other things that I share, because I share a lot of kind of free resources, reports, data, tips and ideas in our regular newsletter. So you'll get those too if you're on our email list. So thank you so much for tuning in to this and all the episodes of the E-commerce Master Plan podcast. I hope we've helped you a little bit get your thoughts in place for next year, the things which are coming, the trends that we're seeing. And I bring you this interview as I do every interview every week, because I want to inspire and help as many e-commerce business owners as possible to succeed and thrive with their business. So please do tell the other e-commerce business owners you know, those who are trying to work out what to do next year, because I'd love this podcast to be able to help them too. I hope you have a great week. Keep optimizing.
Thank you for listening to the E-commerce Master Plan podcast. Find out more at ecommercemasterplan.com/podcast.